So I wanted to welcome everybody to Lacrosse Talks, a new concept for sharing the history of the game. And we're here at the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canals Centre, which is the home of the Ontario Lacrosse Hall of Fame. And it's the Canadian Lacrosse Foundation's pleasure to bring this event to the lacrosse world and share the history of the game. I'm really pleased to introduce this next guest for Lacrosse Talks. If there's anyone who epitomizes a lacrosse life well lived, it's this gentleman. He was a star when he played the game. He was a force when he coached the game. And he was amazing as a builder of the game, and still is. And I'm referring to, of course, Bobby Allan. And Bobby and I go back a number of years through Team Canada involvement, and it's just a pleasure to have you here today, Bobby.
Thanks, Jim.
So there's so much to talk about, literally, that we're going to get right into this. So, Bobby, was there one person who introduced you to lacrosse, or was it a series of people?
Well, I should give you a little background just to start on that. I was born in 1934 in September in Orillia, Ontario, and everybody thinks I was born in Peterborough, but I was born in Orillia, and it was during rough times. My father didn't have a job. We lived with my grandmother in her home, and that was lost. My dad was, as I said, not working, and he obtained a job with a company that forced us to move to St. Mary's, Ontario. And so we moved from Orillia in about 38, I think, and in 41, because of the Second World War, the job he had there vanished as well, because that company was switching over to having to do other things because of the war. So my father hitchhiked to Peterborough, Ontario, and got a job in the General Electric. The branch was called Janelco, and they were making munitions for the Second World War. And that's how we got there. The family was split up for a while. I was with my mother, mainly with an aunt in Toronto. My two sisters were with relatives in Orillia and Barrie. And I got to Peterborough in late September of that year, and that's when I guess officially became a borough boy. As far as the introduction is concerned, I had heard a little bit about the game from my father. He didn't play the game, but he was very interested in sports, and those who have a knowledge or history of the game would know that the Orillia Terriers won the Mann Cup in 34, 35, and 36. And mainly we're built around imports, the way a lot of the championship teams were in the past, Peterborough no exception. And Dad used to talk about them and some of the things that he remembered. He remembered the whole town turning out to see the boys off at the train station when they were going west to play in the Mann Cup. They traveled by train in those days. I think they had to stop in Winnipeg usually to play a short series, maybe 2 out of 3 against a team from that area, and then the winner moved on to the West Coast to play for the Mann Cup. I remember some of the colorful names. Shipwreck Kelly played with Orillia, and I actually met Shipwreck Kelly in about 1949 when he came to Peterborough to try out once, and told him that I had heard little stories about him from my father. One of the imports and a great player with Orillia boarded next door. His name was Wandy McMahon. He was from St. Catharines. And so I had that little connection. And then in Peterborough, one of the kids in the block had an old stick in his garage, but it was broken down the center of the mouth and was never used. But I knew it was a lacrosse stick, but I'd never actually picked one up. And then in the spring of 1947, I was playing with a bunch of kids down by the water at George Street Wharf, and we walked up Townsend Street. That won't make any sense to you people, but the structure was going up. And I made an inquiry about what's this, and one of the kids knew it was going to be a lacrosse bowl. And it was pretty elaborate. When it's finished, they seated over 3,000 people in the stands. And anyway, I learned that there was going to be a senior B lacrosse team playing there, and that bowl was finally named Miller Bowl because Doug Miller Sr. had been the driving force behind the bowl being built. And by the way, it was built by lacrosse players who had served overseas. And when they came back, the bowl that they'd had before had been demolished by the city. It had been used during the war to store metal and recycling products that they could turn into the war effort. And they were very discouraged when they came back because they didn't have any place to play. And they had started playing the indoor game in Peterborough probably in about 33, around that time. Actually, it was played in the areas around Peterborough first, Millbrook and Norwood, and some of the small places before it actually was played in the city. And so after the war, they had to play in a village by the name of Omimi, north of Peterborough, in an arena there, and they played intermediate. And then when Miller Bowl was finished, it opened in 47 with the Senior B season. Team from St. Catharines. St. Catharines had won the Mann Cup in 46, and they were part of the opening ceremonies. And I remember specifically them introducing and spending a little bit of time on the introduction of Jerry Fitzgerald, who came from St. Catharines and was only about 17 or 18 at the time. And I remember them talking about him. And ironically, he wound up in Peterborough playing for the Peterborough team and was one of my coaches. But that's pretty well how I was introduced to the game. As I said, it was about 2.5 blocks from my home, and it became my playground. When I was 12 years old. So from the time I was 12, 13, 14, 15, until I had to go to work full time when I was 16 in the summer, I was there morning, noon, and night. And I beat the hell out of the boards and everything else, and the fence in my backyard, and with a stick that my sister had bought for me for $2. It was a club special, I believe. But anyway, things really started to roll for me in 1948. 47, Peterborough won the Senior B Championship. They beat Fergus out in a 6-game series. They hadn't beaten Fergus all year, and they did, in Fergus, I should say, and they did steal the 5th game there, and they beat them out in Peterborough. And there's a very famous picture. It's out in one of the displays out here at Miller Bowl. There were about 4,600 people at the game. That's a crowd, I'm telling you. We don't even draw that now with the Lakers, you know. But it was a really quite an event. And I was about 13 years old then when I attended that game.
Bobby, I understand you actually could string a stick at age 13.
Well, yeah, I brought one here with me. One of the greatest lessons I ever had came from a gentleman by the name of Mick McGee, who was a very good friend, and you probably, if you're younger, would know his son Jan McGee, who was a great lacrosse player. But my stick broke one time, and these were the old leather sticks, and it broke up about here with the leather. And I didn't want to tape it the way a lot of the other kids did with adhesive tape, because I knew the ball would hit it on the way out and deflect it and change the shot. So I took it to Mick to fix. He was one of my heroes, and he said, Bobby, he said, I'll fix it once. You sit down beside me, and he said, and watch me. And so in order to splice a stick, you need a piece of leather that has loose on both ends. So you have to take it out up to where the break is, and you put a couple of slits in the different, each end, and then you pull it back together again. So I watched him, and then I was, eventually I net it back to about here. I started repairing sticks for kids. I wasn't smart enough to tell them to sit and watch me. I kept doing it all the time. Anyway, and I think I was probably felt pretty cocky, because by the end of the year, I could string an entire stick, and I was only 13 years old. And I really looked after my stick. I wouldn't let anybody touch it. It was mine, and I looked after it, and was in my bedroom at home. Undid the guard all the time to take the strain off the top corner, and shaved it to my satisfaction. When we shaved sticks in Peterborough at that time, you took a Coke bottle, and the stubby Coke bottles had a nice thick shoulder on them, put it in a bag and broke it, and then you got the heavy piece out, and then just shaved it down. It was better than trying to use a spoke shave or something that would catch in the wood and take a big shot of it. And then I would sand it down and refinish it. But anyway, that was a great lesson, and it bothered me that a lot of other guys didn't look after their sticks. That's why a lot of guys couldn't play this game very well, because they didn't look after their sticks. And the plastic sticks now, from my way of looking at it, are no-brainers, because you can use them almost immediately. When I was a kid, the Cadillac of lacrosse sticks was a Martin special, and it was made by Herb Martin of Six Nations. And when Herb died, nobody kept it on. They left. This was a Logan, and probably from the mid-'60s. Joe Logan made it. I played with his son, Willie, who carried it on for a while. And then there were a few others, Williams, Chisholm. I guess the grandfather would be Lally from the Cornwall area. But anyway, that was one of the ones that I used when I was coaching, but not as a player. And when the plastic ones came along, I preferred the traditional. So I would go and get the parts and make my own. And Jimmy Bishop ran the brine factory and warehouse off Liberty Road down off the 401. And I would go and get the parts, and he would give me the head, the handle, the four runners, shooting strings, and bootlace. It's like a greb bootlace. And I liked it because the ball would sit nicely in the stick. It didn't roll around for me. I always wanted the ball up in the top right-hand corner when I shot up there. And so if I caught the ball, I just rolled it without looking at it, and I knew where the ball was in my stick. As soon as I rolled it and dropped the head, I knew it was going up to that corner, and it was ready to go. It was loaded. And I would narrow the pocket by pulling this one nice and tight and narrow the pocket down here. But these sticks were made, they were made for left-handers. You know, open your hand and it's halfway around. If you're a right-hander, you open halfway around, it's going the other way. And so when I rolled mine to load here, that was fine. If I switched hands, I rolled it backwards to load, because that's the way the wood went. A left-hander would fake like that, whereas a right-hander would fake like that. I mean, a right-hander would fake like that because of the way the stick was constructed. So it was a little unfair for right-handers, and they played the game a little bit differently. But anyway, long way of answering your question.
Well, was it common for players in your era in the 1940s, you know, to play left and right? Or was that out of the ordinary?
No. I guess I started when I had a rink in my backyard in the winter, too, to destroy the same fence. We were renting, by the way. And when we moved, they couldn't see the fence. It was behind the garage. But anyway, I had heard that Gordie Howe could shoot both ways in hockey. So I actually learned how to shoot both ways in hockey, too, that way. And the thing about it was that I shot left. I shot left in hockey, but I'm right-handed. So to switch hands, it was a piece of cake. That's my dominant hand over here. So I would just take it across and then put my hand on it. The only hard part switching hands is catching. It's hard to catch on your wrong hand. And so I would probably catch with one hand and then put the hand on here so it wouldn't destroy it, and make the play from there. So to answer your question, yes, but I just considered it another weapon. Yeah. I was just talking recently to Jocelyn Beyond, her young lad, Jason. Jack Beyond was a wonderful lacrosse player and one of my best friends. But Jason is at Hobart, Euroschool, right? Yeah. And she was saying that they're trying to get him to start to use, he's a lefty, try to use his other hand. And he was kind of rebelling. And I said to her, tell him to learn how to do it, because it's another weapon to use. And, you know, if you take him the other way and he knows you can do it, then you can always come back to your good hand again. And I also quoted, I'm always, as a coach too, I was always reading and quoting. And Bruce Lee, the old martial arts individual, once said, "One way is no way." In other words, if you've only got one way of doing something, you're going to lose. And so you need options. You always have to have options. And I said to her that you tell them one way is no way.
What was the game like in the late 40s, Bob? It was different for sure, right?
Much rougher. First of all, there was the seventh player. The rover was out there, which added to the clutter. And I weighed about, when I started to play senior, it was in 54, I think I weighed about 140 pounds, something like that. And you needed some space, but so there wasn't much space. It was very slow. It was invented, as Don Fisher has said, by the hockey crowd. And so you almost had your up front guys, and you had your two defenders who stayed back, and it was very similar to the hockey that way. I was always drawn to the guys who could move around and were fast, and they had some good stick skills, but there were no helmets, no masks, inferior equipment, wooden stick, no room for a coward.
Then as you moved into the 50s, Peterborough had a dynasty at that time, didn't they?
Right. They won the Senior B 2 years in a row in 47 and 48. And I'd like to come back to 48. You can remind me before I finish. But after they won that 2 years in a row, then they moved to Senior A. Not too bad, the 2 years. They had a few imports, not many, and they lost out in the first round of the playoffs. And so they went all in 51 with imports. They already had Bobby Thorpe from St. Catharines. They had Jerry Fitzgerald from St. Catharines. Don Ashby was there from Weston, Ontario. And they brought in Ike Hildebrand from the West, Moon Wooten, Rusty Slater, Curly Mason from Owen Sound. Nippo Hearn came from St. Catharines. Harry Whipper came from St. Catharines. They had about 10 of them. Ross Paulus came from Six Nations. And that was the dynasty they put together. And they won 4 in a row, 51, 2, 3, and 4. And we got into the tail end of it. When I say we, my running mate Bobby Curtis and myself, as 19-year-olds, made the team in 54. And we were products of the minor system, and that's what I'd like to talk about. It started in 48, and it was very unique. They had a house league at night for bantam, midget, and juvenile, but during the day there was a full-time instructor there. He was there from 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock, Monday to Friday. Jack Foote was the first one, and he had been in the war, came back, and was at University of Toronto studying for phys ed, and they hired him, and he ran the school. He was the lead instructor, and it was for kids 12 and under. The only two groups really were what you would call novice and peewee. Now we called them tadpole and peewee then. The morning was all games, and the afternoon practices, and some of the house league teams, bantams, I was a bantam to start, would get a chance to play scrub games and things during the day. But I was part of that school for a long time. Jack Foote was there for 2 years, and then Jerry Fitzgerald came, and then Harry Whipper came, and it just gave us a chance to have that stick in our hand every day and to be a part of the minor was not like today where they play 40, 50 games. We played 2 or 3 nights a week in the house league. In the bantam league, we had 5 teams, and at the end of the year, they chose an all-star team. And it was strictly win or get out, and we would always start with Aurelia or Huntsville, and it'd be 2 games, total points, and if you won, you went on. If you lost, you were gone. So you might have got 2 provincial games in a season. And but anyway, it paid off for us, and we we made that 1954 team and
Won the Mann Cup.
won the Mann Cup.
Yeah.
Thought we'd died and gone to heaven. I thought that was the way it was going to happen every year. But great memories. There are only four of us left from that team as well. There's a picture out in the lobby.
Huh. Then it was a little foreshadowing in terms of the West Coast for you. In 1956, you were
Yes.
you were the biggest news since Newsy Lalonde, right? Heading out to
Maybe in 57. I'm not sure, I'm not sure about 56. Yeah, I had two pretty good years. When we first started to play in 54 then, though, it was very disappointing at first. The old veterans just took Bobby and I aside and said, you get the ball for us and then get lost. And that's kind of the way they played. It was strictly isolation game. You keep your guy engaged, keep him busy, and we'll go one-on-one, and that's the way. We like to run. We wanted to run and play, and halfway through the season, for some reason or other, they put Bobby and myself with a guy by the name of Denny Peterson, who had come from the Mimico area, another import, with Harry Whipper and a fellow by the name of Louis Nickel, who had come from Toronto. We all liked to run, and so you almost had two teams within the one. The one played the old style, we played the new style, and did very well. There's one more little story I think you should know, really, that my parents moved from Peterborough to St. Catharines early in 54. And I had only played 1 year of junior at that time because they made us play, I don't know why, they made us play 2 years of juvenile before we hit junior. So we played the 1 year, and then family moved up here. So I came to St. Catharines with them. And somebody said, I had finished high school, and I wanted to make some money to go to university. And anyway, somebody said to go and see the president of the senior club, and he'll get you a job. So I used to go to see him maybe once a week. I didn't bug him too much, I guess. And after about a month or so, I guess, I walked in one day and just asked him if he had heard anything. And he must have been in a bad mood or something. I don't know why. But he said, why should I waste my time looking for a job for you? He says, I don't even know if you can play lacrosse. I said, thanks for your time. And I left and went back home to Peterborough, and I played senior that year. And we beat St. Catharines out in the playoffs. And I got a few goals. And I never did get a chance to rub it in, but that's a little aside. But,
could have been a different story.
But you don't forget things like that. And anyway, I went back home and we played there. So, and then in 55, we went west for the Mann Cup. And when I was in Victoria, a small group from Nanaimo came down to the dressing room after one of the games to see me and see if I'd be interested in going to Nanaimo the next year. And so Harry Whipper had been also signed as the playing coach, and he came to see me. I was at University of Toronto at the time, and he came to see me, and I signed in January to go and
56. Yeah.
In 56, yeah. And we had a really good year out there. We won it all and came back and played Peterborough in the Maple Leaf Gardens. That was an experience. I didn't have a target on my shirt, but I needed one. Yeah, it was good. It was really. But when I said about rough too, it was rough. Got the shock of my life. I'm just still 21. Really my first year of senior, legitimately, because we were underagers to begin with. And anyway, got off to a very fast start. I got a couple in my first shift and had a good first half. And then I went into we were playing 4 quarters. I went into the washroom at halftime to have a pee. I guess I can say that, can I? And nothing but blood. Oh boy. And you're just a kid, and what's going on here? I said, I had numerous cuts and stitches. I'd already lost a couple of teeth and had my nose broken, but this was something else. You can't see that. It was a real shocker. And But we were really looked after well in those days by our doctors. He said, well, you probably got a bad bruise. You drink lots of water, you'll be okay. So went back out and finished. And when the series was over, I keep telling my own kids all the time, you have to look after your own health care. And I learned early you do. So I phoned my old Peterborough doctor from the university, and he set up an appointment for me in Peterborough to come home and on the weekend and get x-rayed, and which I did, and things were fine. The guy who initially diagnosed me, I guess he was right. It was just a bruise, but it was sure scary.
Wow.
And intimidating, you know. But we still won. I should tell you as well, there was a lot of controversy when I went. There was a rule in the league that only one player from each Eastern team could go west, only one. And Harry Whipper was already there. So when I signed to go with Nanaimo, Peterborough protested. They said, this is the rule, Allan shouldn't be eligible to go. And anyway, the CLA overruled the OLA, and I was allowed to go, and we did well and won the Mann Cup. So
that was 56.
So that really disturbed Peterborough when that happened, yeah.
Didn't a lot of things come to a head in 57?
Of my own doing, sort of. I decided early on, I guess, they came after me again really early, that I'd go back. So I hastily signed in January, and then at the last minute I had second thoughts, and Peterborough didn't come after me until the end almost or till the beginning of when I was supposed to leave to go west. I finished my last exam at University of Toronto, and I went to Peterborough, and of course I got cornered there, and they wanted me to stay, and I said I can't. I wanted to stay, but I said I can't because I've already signed and I've already received expense money. So I can still remember meeting on a Sunday afternoon. I was supposed to fly out Monday morning in the general manager's house, and we came to a bit of an agreement, and I said, if I can get clearance to stay, I will stay. If I can't, I'm on my way tomorrow. And we phoned the president of the OLA. I'm not going to name any names or anything. I told him the situation. I said, I've signed to go to Nanaimo. I've received expense money. I don't want to go. Peterborough wants me to stay. What will I do? He said, you shouldn't have been allowed to go in the first place in the previous year, 56. He said they were still upset about that. And we were being backed by the president here. And he said, you send the expense money back and you sign with Peterborough and everything will be fine. So I did. And once again, Nanaimo was really upset. I can't blame them. You know, I'd be upset too. It was midnight hour for them. Most of the players were signed. It was hard to get a replacement for me. And apologized and everything else to them. They weren't happy. And anyway, I played the whole year, had a really good year, and then partway through the final series playoffs against Hamilton, got the word that I wasn't eligible for the Mann Cup. And Peterborough was so annoyed that I think maybe they thought they were going to call the bluff of the CLA. And there was no ticket for me to go west, so Peterborough flew me out with the team. And they met on the morning of the opening game and said, well, what if we play them? What's going to happen? And they said that Victoria would protest, and if we won, Victoria would win the protest. And Peterborough said, that's fine, we'll do that. We'll play the game under protest. So we went out and we did the warm-up, and we went back into the dressing room. There were about 4,000 fans there in Victoria, and did the warm-up back into the dressing room. And they have a committee for the Mann Cup that looks after it. They run it. The CLA had their own committee. Unbeknownst to the committee, the president of the OLA came into our room, and he threatened everybody with lifetime suspensions. We had some pro hockey players there. Hildebrand was still there. And anyway, And then another CLA member came in and threatened us as well. So the Peterborough leadership decided we're not going to go on the floor until those threats are withdrawn. The CLA committee running the tournament knew nothing about it. And long and the short of it was, the game was called off. 4,000 people there. And it was nuts, I'm telling you. Like in those old outdoor bowls, you had to walk from your dressing room to the floor. And there was a bit of a gauntlet you had to go through, you know, of fans. And if it was a nasty game, it was a gauntlet and a half. it was tough. Well, it was nothing like walking from the Victoria Arena back to the hotel that night. It was bad. We couldn't get a cab. The people were turning on us. They were yelling at us and swearing at us. And we had to walk from the rink all the way to the old Strathcona Hotel. And then they cut off our hotel. They cut off our airfare. We had to get donations from home. And we spent 3 days on the train, sitting up, because we didn't have any money for berths, and the players all chipped in what they had too. And then at the end of it, on the train, you'd go into the club car to eat, and you hoped that there was a player there who had some money to pay for the food. It was nasty, and it was a bad mark on me personally, because all the newspapers always said, Allan's big mistake was signing 2 contracts, and that was all that was there. Just that, not the fact that I had called the OLA. Because if the OLA president had even hesitated and said you can't, I was on that airplane to go out. But as it turned out, they suspended us all for 5 years.
Wow.
The whole team, which they did it too fast. First, they should have thought a little bit longer about it, because the players really didn't have any say in it. It was the GM and the coach and the executive. They were the ones that called the shots, and we really didn't do anything. I wasn't eligible to play anyway, but they still suspended me, which didn't make a lot of sense. And anyway, they suspended us for 5 years. And after 1 year, they realized, I guess, it was wrong, and they reinstated all of us. Everybody except the coach, general manager, and the members of the board of directors who were there at the time, and the rest of us were all reinstated. And I think a lot of the guys were prepared to quit. They really were, but I think we all went back in '59, I think, to prove a point. Okay. And we won the East and went back out for the Mann Cup again and lost in that one.
Well, maybe we'll move on to a little bit of the coaching,
Okay.
and beginning as a coach and those things, because that leads into the pro leagues and that sort of thing.
Okay, I'll back up just a wee bit though. I retired in '60. I wasn't going to play anymore. I had had enough, and I was discouraged with everything that had happened. The other thing was that suspension really hurt Peterborough. Personally, it was just a black eye as far as I was concerned. But Peterborough had a junior team in '57 that went 7 games with Brampton. Brampton beat them in 7 games and then won the Minnow Cup. Every one of those junior kids was coming back to play junior again. But because there wasn't any senior team in Peterborough in '58, somebody had the bright idea of moving the entire junior team up, which cost Peterborough a Minnow Cup, really. And it cost all those kids a Minnow Cup, too, because you go 7 games in the finals 1 year and every kid's coming back again. You know, odds are in your favor. You're going to have a pretty good shot at a championship. So that was bad. And then we all quit in '60 pretty well, and they played 1 more year, and then senior lacrosse folded up in Peterborough. There was no senior in '61, '62, and '63. Most of the kids went to Brooklyn to play. Huh. And I thought I was finished. Here's another ironic thing that happened. I thought I was finished, and spring of '61, I get a call from the NYMO. Would you be interested in coming out for, for July and August? And they were the ones that really protested. If they had just said it's okay for him to play, none of that nonsense would have happened, you know. But anyway, Pat and I, and we had a 2-year-old daughter at the time, Kim. packed up the Volkswagen Beetle and drove to Nanaimo, and we played it there. That's something else I should mention too, that personally and selfishly, I don't regret staying in Peterborough. I really don't.
Well.
Anyway, no, because Pat and I wouldn't have married. We wouldn't have 3 great daughters, 3 great sons-in-law, and 9 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild. I'm sure it wouldn't have happened, but so I don't regret not going.
Early in the 60s, you started coaching, and you actually had success fairly quickly, didn't you? Yeah.
Well, I did. I was a phys ed teacher, though. I had had a lot of experience coaching. Going way back to Miller Bowl, when I was 13, I was too old for that pee-wee thing in the morning, and I coached one of the teams. And when I was 16, I was the assistant to Harry Whipper for the pee-wee all-star team. So I was kind of in it. And then I took phys ed, and I became a coach in high school. I coached football and basketball, track and field, and I coached some hockey as well. So I had some coaching experience, well, I've got to back up a little further, I'm sorry, but the 61 and 62, I went to Nanaimo, and I'd like to mention there, too, that was good, because the first year, Pat and I with Kim, lived in an auto court, and we lived with Jack Bionda and his family, John Ferguson, that was prior to playing with the Montreal Canadiens, and we became lifelong friends with them, and so it was really rewarding to meet those people, and we still, Jack and John are both gone, they passed away, but we're still in touch with family, and I think that's important too. And then after 62, I quit again. I figured I had enough, and I had had summer schools and everything else, and then in 64, Lacrosse came back to Peterborough, and it was an entirely different group putting it together, and Cy Coombs was coaching the Peterborough team, and he came after me to play, and I didn't want to play, and finally I said, call me after school's out in July. So he called me, and I played the last 10 or 12 games for them, had a good 10 or 12 games, got picked up by Brooklyn for the Mann Cup, and we lost in 7 games to them, and I had a good series, and at the end of that, they asked me if I would coach next year with they weren't called the Lakers then. That didn't happen until 68. But so I started to coach them, and it was a little difficult because I was only 30, I think, and I was playing with these guys, and now I got to be coaching them, but I was pretty good in the coaching. I learned very early on that if you're going to coach kids, you treat them like kids. You go coach men, you treat them like men. And so I was able to enjoy that nice, fine line down the middle where I'm the play. I'm still playing too. I guess I should have mentioned that. That was part of the deal. We want you to still play. So I played, and you have to walk that line where I'm a player, I'm a coach, and it's nice, and I'm friends with all of them too. So it was a little tough that way, but I didn't play nearly as well, and I didn't play very much either. I couldn't play for me. I was a ball control freak as a coach. I hated turnovers. As a player, I was freewheeler.
Funny how a different hat.
We would have had talks. And
you're torn.
Yeah, and I learned early on how to deal with them too. It was good. Maybe it was because from my high school coaching it might have helped. But 2 years later we won the Mann Cup. I had some good kids come up. I had a few tough guys so we could compete with Brampton, and Johnny Davis joined us, and Johnny was really good. And talk about dealing with people. Johnny came to me one time and he said, Bob, why are you always on my ass? I said, John, I think you're the best lacrosse player in Canada, and I expect a lot from you. Thank you, he said. So it's an easy way of kind of putting out a fire, a little bit of honey. But he was a wonderful player, and that was a good year. The East was still very weak. The West was very strong in those days, and they allowed the East to pick up a number of players for the Mann Cup. Our best centerman had a broken jaw, so I could pick 4 guys up, and I picked up Donnie Arthurs and Bill Castater from Brampton, and Red Crawford from Brooklyn, and Butch Keegan from Toronto. But ball control was so important, and those 3 of those guys were the best centermen around, and we needed that possession, you know, and that was really good for us. But it was very rewarding, and I can get back to the possession a bit in a minute, because in '67 we didn't do as well, and then in '68 a semi-pro league started.
Yes.
And Jim Bishop and Morley Kells were the driving forces behind that league starting. In the East, we had Peterborough stayed, and Toronto came in. And Bishop went to Detroit, and Montreal came in. So it was a different league. And out west, all 4 teams came in. Vancouver, Victoria, and New West played in their own rinks, and Coquitlam played out of Portland, Oregon. Wow. And it was quite a league. We had an interchange even. Every team in the East traveled west and did a swing through the league, and every team from the West came this way too, and it was really good. And we used to meet every Monday night in the Oshawa Civic Center to get organized. And Bishop and Kells had done all the work in preparation, and so one night at one of the meetings, it was dumped on Peterborough to create the rule book, and that meant it was on my lap. And so I was teaching, as I mentioned before, but I worked every night for a week until about 4 in the morning. I had a tape recorder, and I was armed with the WA rule book, the OLA rule book. I used the NHL book. I used the NBA book, and I dictated into a reel-to-reel tape. On the way to work in the morning, I dropped it off at an office, and one of the gals there had it all typed for me when I was on my way home that night. And I would go home that night and proof what had been typed, create the next tape, and the next Monday we had a rough draft to go over. And it changed the game. That rule book changed the game, and I got probably most of the credit for it, just because I did the legwork, but actually it was a lot of people who contributed to it. And what really drove it all was the 1967 Mann Cup, the year before. Brooklyn had won in the East, and Vancouver won in the West. Brooklyn won the first game. Vancouver won the next 3. Brooklyn had to do something to try to level the playing field, so they played a zone defense and won the 5th game. 6th game, Vancouver was up 3-1 at the end of the first period. Second period, no shots. No shots were taken. Brooklyn wouldn't come out of their zone. Vancouver wouldn't go in. They had a 3-1 lead. You guys come out and play if you want. And they just passed the ball around. And this thing happened in basketball one time too. I can remember seeing pictures of a point guard in basketball actually sitting on the ball, and the other guy standing watching, and the guys on zone wouldn't come out and they wouldn't go in. But so something had to be done to change that, and that's why the 30-second rule came in. And that would have cured the whole thing. And that was a black mark too. It didn't get nearly the publicity we got in '57, but anyway, the fans were booing, throwing things. They were really upset. Vancouver guys were fighting among themselves in the dressing room. I talked to a lot of them later. You know, come on, we got to play for our fans. The other guys, hell with them. You know, they want to come out. We're not going to go in. Final score was 5-3, I think, and Vancouver had won the Mann Cup, but it was tainted. And we started with the 45-second rule. And we tried that for maybe a few exhibition games and then cut it back to 30. I jokingly say now that really all they need is about 10 now or 12, because all they do is shoot. And the other thing was no more face-offs after a ball goes out of bounds. There was no screen around the boards. It was only screened behind the nets. So you can imagine how often that ball was out of bounds and then having to face it off every time. It just went to the non-offending team. And the first year, we wanted the referees to give the ball quickly to the non-offending team. So if it went out, they just threw it to the nearest non-offending player and they were gone. Now they blow the whistle and stop it. But it changed the way the game was played, and it's been much faster since.
Yeah, as you mentioned before, the game had been a walking game up to a certain point, and then really you added the speed to the game. The clock helped that.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, brought that to it. And you had these rivalries that began to be built with a few of these legends of the game, like Morley Kells and Jim Bishop, right? And
yeah.
You guys went at it, and you're best of friends afterwards, but you guys really went at it, didn't you?
Yeah, it was pretty serious stuff, but poor Jim's gone now. I can tell you a quick story about Jim, if you can bring me back to where I was supposed to be. I stopped there on the way to, Pat and I were going out of town, so we stopped at the brine factory, and I picked up the parts for one of these sticks. And Jimmy walked me out. For those who don't know Jim Bishop, he coached the Oshawa Green Gales, and they won 7 Mann Cups in a row. 7. I first met him when I was about 15 or 16. He was coaching the Toronto Green Gales, and they played out of the Sunnyside Bowl. Anybody here who doesn't know what Sunnyside was? Yeah. It's just by the exhibition on the lake shore. It was like a midway in the summertime with everything around there, and we used to stop there for our pregame meal on the way to St. Catharines. We would hot dog and a Coke at one of these concessions. But anyway, that's where Jim played, and his players were fit as a fiddle because he worked for Lloyd Percival, who was running the sports college in those days. Lloyd Percival was Canada's national track coach. He was way ahead of his time. When the Russian hockey team was starting to build in the 50s and early 60s, they used Lloyd Percival's book as guiding for fitness and everything else. So Bish got an early training. I was 15 or 16. He was about 20 or 21. And so I knew him then. And then when I had moved to St. Catharines for that way back in 54, Bish was after Bobby Curtis, myself. He had been playing out of Oakville Trafalgar rink in 53, and he was moving to Newmarket in 54, and he wanted Bobby and myself to join him. And instead of that, we played senior in Peterborough. So I went way back with Jim, and we did. We had a lot of nasty rivalries, and but that particular day, he walked me to the car after he gave me all the parts, and he said to me, would you consider making me a stick? And I said, fine, you want to give me the parts? That's fine, I'll make it. So I spent a lot of time on it. I was really proud of it. He wanted a wooden handle, and I shaved it and had it all nice. And he was coaching the Whitby Juniors at the time. And I went down to the arena when they were playing Peterborough, and he wasn't there. So I asked Jeff McComb where he was, and he said, I don't know. He didn't seem very well. And so I gave Jeff the stick to take to him, and I phoned him the next day and asked him if he was all right. And he said, I came out of the rink to get on the bus, and I couldn't get on the bus. I don't know what it was with him. And then he didn't show the next time either, and that was the last time we really talked. And then he died. Not too long after that, really. So I never had a chance to really chat with him. I tried to get the stick back for a memento, but nobody seemed to know where it was. Jimmy probably gave it to a kid, which would be good. But anyway, yeah, Morley and Morley, actually Morley came to Peterborough one time too and tried to get me to coach that junior lakeshore club that he had, but I opted out of that. But anyway, they were instrumental eventually in starting that original NLL as well. But anyway, he went to Brantford, and I don't know what it was. It was a fierce, fierce rivalry. On 2 occasions, the visiting team needed a police escort to get out of the rink. Once in Brantford, they were throwing bottles at us, and once in Peterborough, and they had to bring the bus right into the rink in Peterborough to get the team on it to take them out. But it was bad. But Morley was good for the game. He had CBC connections. He had worked with McLaren Advertising in Toronto. McLarens were responsible for the Maple Leaf Garden program and for the between period interviews, and so he had really good connections there. And that rivalry went on, and they beat us out in 71 and 72 in really good series. And then in 73, we beat them. And that was a bit of a fairy tale season as well in 73. I started with 12 players. That's all I had at the start of the year, and then we wound up winning the Mann Cup. But I inherited 4 really good lacrosse juniors who had graduated that year. On the right side, I had Gordie Floyd and Jimmy Wasson. On the left side, I had Lenny Powers and John Grant Sr. And I kept them all together as kids and put one veteran with them to stay out of their way. And they were really good. That made a big difference. And we beat Brantford out, and then we won the Mann Cup in a 1-game series. And that was Morley's doing as well. Because of his CBC connections, he was always trying to get the games televised. And CBC would only televise if it was the championship game. And the only way to guarantee a championship game was to have 1 game. And because Morley was coaching Brantford, that's where the game was, in Brantford. So we had to go, but it was good. We won it in Brantford.
Wow.
Yeah, it was nice. And I can lead right into the other part if you want.
Pro League?
Yeah, that fall, John Ferguson phoned me from Montreal, and he said, Bob, there's going to be a Pro League next year. And he said, I'm part of the Montreal team. Can I have the first right of refusal to have you coach? And so we negotiated quite a bit back and forth. And the only way I could do it, I was vice principal at the time of a 1,500 people school, 90 teachers to look after too. And the only way I can do it is to do a lot of have the training camp in Peterborough, and then as much as possible parachute the team in for games. And so that's the way we were prepared to do it. And then Jack Beyond was GM of Philadelphia, and he had come after me to go to Philly as well. And anyway, Fergie called me one time and said, Bob, we can't do it with you in Peterborough. He said the French Canadians newspapers after me. He said because they don't think that the guys from around here will stand a chance of making the team when you're basing everything in Peterborough. And so I said, fine, I understand. And I just called Jack, and I wound up coaching Philadelphia. So
The Wings, yeah. This all kind of leads up to a pretty historical moment on the international game.
doesn't it?
And a little preamble. International game was in its fledgling years, and Bobby had been involved in '67 with the Centennial game. But '78, Canada wasn't going to send an entry to Manchester, England, and that might have been the death knell for a number of years of the FIL, the international game. But a couple of proud Canadians stepped up. And I'll let Bobby take it over, but Marshall Spence and Boyd Berger and a few other people, which you can fill in, stepped up. And just to have a team go over there was a miracle, really. And they only had one guy in mind to coach this team. And I think that was a big part of why they carried forward, right? So maybe you can pick up on that.
Yeah, I should back up again with my personal history. I coached Philadelphia in '74. And as I said, I had that big school to look after. I was flying out of Peterborough 4 days a week sometimes. Anything from a 2-seater Apache to a Millard Air, grandfather of the notorious Dylan Millard. He was a fine man, the grandfather. He piloted us as well. But had a lot of scares flying, planes, engine catching on fire, and engine starting to miss. It wouldn't start again once we landed, and thunderstorms, and oh God, my wife, poor wife. And anyway, at the end of that year, we lost to Morley in the championship. He was coaching Rochester, and it was pretty successful. 40 games we played, though. 40 games, and I didn't think the league was that sound, so I didn't go back in '75 with them. And then I got a call from a guy by the name of Fitz Dixon, a very wealthy man who had bought the team. When the league folded eventually, he bought the 76ers, and he had part of the Flyers, and he was responsible for bringing Dr. J to Philadelphia with the basketball. Anyway, out of the blue, after he and I hadn't gone back. Out of the blue, and the league's already underway, I get a phone call from him, and he wanted to know if I would come down and be general manager. And I said, well, I'm working. I can't just leave and go down. And I said, I can come on the weekend maybe. So he said, fine. So then about half an hour later, the phone rings again, and it's him. And he says, what time's school out? I said, well, I can probably get away about 3:30. He says, fine, I'll have my plane at the airport for you. He said, you bring your wife. And we went down and stayed at this big place. And he owned a couple of shares of Secretariat. And he was pretty well to do, this guy. And anyway, I turned him down. I just didn't think it was that good. Well, they came whining and dining after me again to go down in '76 and be the head coach. And it was kind of one of those offers you couldn't refuse, I guess, towards the end. And so I caved and said, sure, I'll do it, but I had to quit my job. So I quit my job effective December 31st, '75, and the league folded 6 weeks after. So I had no job. And I really felt that's my lacrosse year has ended. And then in '77, Doug Budden and Marshall Spence came to see me in Peterborough and wanted to know if I'd coach the Canadian national field team in Manchester the next year. And once again, I thought that would be a nice experience, and so I decided to do it. The CLA, I think, had dropped out of the funding, and there wasn't going to be a team, and so the OLA decided that they would pick it up. But it wasn't without a lot of problems. You talk about Bish and Morley, rivals, that sort of thing. Box and field, there was a real rivalry. I had an awful time trying to put this team together. The U.S. had already shortlisted their team. They had had a camp with 80-some guys and 23 coaches to evaluate them and everything, and they were raring to go, and they were almost unbeatable. And anyway, so we started, but we didn't have our first practice until the snow cleared. And we used to practice at York University and on Saturday mornings. And my first practice, I had 12 guys. We sent out 55 invitations. A lot of coaches said, no, box coaches said, you can't go. There was that conflict between box and field. It was bad. And anyway, we just slowly added. We took some high school kids up to the field, and we tried to manage. We had about 5 guys down in the States going to school down there, which helped. And then I got a letter from this guy. He was at Hobart saying, I've got dual citizenship. Can I play? Or try out. So he played. And we put it together and went to England, and we beat England first, and then we played the United States in the round robin, and we lost 28-4. Boy, people just say, well, that's just a number. But they were quite good. And anyway, we just kept regrouping all the time. And a nice, tight-knit group. I was working with Don Barry and Gus McCauley and Ron Wicks. And Boyd Berriger was the treasurer. And they treated us really, really well. And anyway, we regrouped, and we beat Australia. And then we went into the final game. And wouldn't you know it, we beat the U.S. team 17-16 in overtime. And just to go from 28-4 to 17-16, Yogi Berra was right, it ain't over till it's over. And really, the guys believed in that, I think. And I just said, hey, they're just a bunch of guys with lacrosse sticks, and I think you're better, And we got off to a good start, and it really was a fairy tale. We had our 40-year reunion last June. There are 22 living players, 19 showed up. Yeah. and some of them came from afar. And John Meridian flew up on a Thursday for the reunion, and he was gone Friday morning back to Florida again. He had to. It was amazing how tight that group has become as well, you know. Yeah. Cherish your teammates. It's really important. So, yeah, that still sticks as one of the big memories.
Yeah, and that I can say that game really did change the future of the international game forever, and also even the Pro League, because now you had a rivalry between the U.S. and Canada that couldn't be manufactured. It existed, and promoters used that to help test the box game in different cities. That Canada-U.S. rivalry and the modern leagues came out of that. If Canada hadn't gone that year, everything could have been set back 15, 20 years. Yeah. You know, we wouldn't be where we are today with Olympic possibilities coming up quickly and 60 countries playing the game. It really did change things.
The spin-offs were great, really great spin-offs, and the number of kids that we have at school down in the States now, men and women, our junior lacrosse team suffers because of it in Peterborough, because we had 12 kids on scholarship. When I was playing junior, I was the only guy going to school. You know, and these things have changed so much. But the junior schedule was almost over before all 12 kids were back from school, so it's really hurt us that way. But these kids are getting an education and having most of it paid for and doing really well. And I know we were talking earlier, you were talking earlier about Gary and Paul Gate. Gary and Paul Gate tried out for us. I stuck with them from 78, 82, 86. And they tried out for the 86 team. And I believe they were only about 18 years old at the time. And they didn't make the team. In hindsight, maybe I should have had them as 18-year-olds. I don't know. But I knew them fairly well. And I encouraged them to stick with it. And I said, I'll do my best to get you a scholarship. And Roy Simmons from Syracuse University, one of my favorite people at that time, had really helped us prepare. And
for 78,
in 78, yes. And I really knew Roy quite well. So I phoned him one day after the 86 stuff, and I said, or maybe just prior to it, and I said, Roy, how would you like a pure left-hander, about 6'1", about 190, 95 pounds, great lacrosse player? He said, my God, he says, would I ever? And I said, how would you like two of them? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, they're identical twins. And, well, they changed the way the whole game was played down in the States. Yeah. And fortunately, if they had gone anyplace else, that might not have happened. I hate coaches who are my way or the highway kind of guys. I just detest them. I said, you know, but Roy was one of those guys who taught his kids as much about life as he did about lacrosse, and he allowed creativity. And boy, were they creative. It was really something.
Yeah, and that was almost paying back a favor.
It really was, yeah. I think I wrote a little article about something like that at one time, about how he had helped us in 78, and I said something about, I hope I leveled the playing field when 19 and 22 arrived in Syracuse.
I think I saw him recently, and he was thrilled to hear about our 40th reunion, and a lot of the guys passed a lot of good words on for him and what he did.
And I was afraid that he hurt his own chances of getting into the U.S. Hall of Fame down there because he helped us. There was a real rivalry there, too. We weren't, after we beat them in 78, they wouldn't play us any exhibition games. They were saying, don't play Canada, except we played Navy one time. And the Navy coach said after, nobody's going to tell me who I can play and who I can't play. And it was around the time when Taylor, the Canadian guy, helped get the hostages out of Iran. So.
Well, I guess final question is, you know, you're very involved in the different pro leagues as a mentor and helping things along. You know, how do you feel about where the game is now and where it might go, Bobby? You know,
Good things, bad things. I know I wasn't a proponent of the back door, front door. First of all, I don't think anybody should be able to play any game and hit people and not get hit back. And when you come out the back door, quite often, you never carry the ball, some of those guys. That was different with that final series in the Mann Cup this year. Peterborough has an outstanding back door. They're big, they're strong, they're fast, they can all carry the ball. They could play any kind of game, really. And it's very quick. But I still think all of those guys would rather play the whole game. Mm-hmm. They'd rather play the full length of the floor. It's more fun. Why be locked into the game? Games are too specialized. Coaches have got too much to say about it, you know. Referees shouldn't make any discretionary calls. It should be black and white if the rules are there. And coaches shouldn't be allowed to pigeonhole kids.
Control it.
You know, don't label it. Well, Les Bartley was a good friend of mine, and I know Les and Johnny Meridian started this in 98 or 99 with the Buffalo Bandits. That's where it started. First time I saw it was Buffer McCready from St. Catharines, because he worked with them in Buffalo. Came to Peterborough and played against our good, strong junior team once, and he played the front door, back door. But I think the fans would like to see the kids. For me, I could run, and transition was a big part of my game, you know, getting up the floor. And it was a fun part, too. But I'd like to see these kids have a chance to play the entire game. When you play on the street, everybody played. Nobody was kind of, you can't come past center, you know, that kind of stuff. So I feel that way, but I do feel that it's still a very fast game. The kids are bigger, stronger, faster, more skilled, and they could play no matter what the game was. I do have some concerns about where the game's going. You mentioned that. I have a great fear that with all these professional hockey teams and billionaires taking over the NLL teams, that eventually it might get to the point where these kids are employed full-time, and they will not be allowed to play senior summer league. And you won't have your Peterborough Lakers, and you won't have your Brampton Excelsiors, and I don't want to see that happen, because it's a big part of the Peterborough community. Junior lacrosse then that feeds the NLL would have to become the major league. But even then, there has to be some accommodation to help these. Last year, the NLL ran till June the 10th, I think it was. You know, we didn't have our two goaltenders for the first 8 games or something like that, because they were playing for the championship. It'd be nice right now if those leagues could get together and marry up their schedules so that the kids could do both. And the community. After all those players that play in the NLL, they came from up here, and not many came from the south. But so that's a big fear. I don't know whether it'll happen or not. Probably not in my lifetime, but.
Well, why don't we open it up to some questions to end our evening, and for Bobby.
How or why did you develop your infamous Bobby Allan shot? Because I remember my boys, when they were young and playing, practiced that endlessly. Wow. And so did half the other kids on their teams, much to the dismay of their coaches. And to this day, when we're watching pro games and somebody pulls one, they always say, "Oh, did you see that Bobby Allan?"
You know, in Mimico, a lot of kids. That's where it started, in Mimico. But a lot of kids didn't know there was even a Bobby Allan. It was a shot, and I was given a lot of credit by Brian Shanahan for creating it. That's not true. Bucko McDonald was an old lacrosse player, a good lacrosse player, played hockey for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He had a great backhand, from what I understand. First guy I saw use it was a fellow by the name of Jackie Howes, who showed up in Peterborough to play with the senior team in, I think it was 1949, and he threw a backhand. But they didn't use it much. I used it a fair amount, but I used it as a weapon. I didn't use it as grandstanding, that sort of thing. I wouldn't throw it in a bad situation because it might cause a turnover, but it was an excellent weapon. If I could come in a 3-on-2 and I had a guy here and a guy there, and I could fake at that guy to draw the back fin and then throw it behind my back to that guy. It was like switching hands. It was just the same. I'm a lefty. If I throw a backhand, it's kind of like a righty shot. So to me, it was just a weapon, and Mimico seemed to be the community that adopted it. Had some funny stories about that, though. My grandson played lacrosse for McMaster, and there was a kid on his team from Mimico, and the kid was throwing these Bobby Allans all the time at practice and everything, and my grandson didn't say a word to him. And then finally one time he said, "What the hell are you talking about Bobby Allan? You don't even know Bobby Allan." The kid said, "Do you? Do you?" And he said, "My grandfather." and I didn't meet the kid. But anyway, that's... And Mimico was a great bowl, too. I love playing in the bowls. Miller Bowl in Peterborough, Hague Bowl in St. Catharines, Drummond Street Bowl in Mimico, Cannon Street Bowl in Hamilton, Rose Bowl in Brampton, and it was wonderful playing in those outdoor bowls. The problem was the weather, and it was terrible to drive to a rink. To drive from Peterborough, there was no 401, there was no 115. You had to go down Highway 2 and then Kingston Road and through the city. It was about 4 hours to St. Catharines. You get there, it starts to rain. So you have to go back home again and come back in another night.
Bobby, do you have a comment on the size of the goalies in box lacrosse these days?
Very big.
They widened the net for them.
They're very big until a lot of them take the pads off, then they're not very big. But no, when they took the rover off in box lacrosse, the net was 4.5 by 4.5. And when they took the rover off, they knocked it down by 4 by 4. And the goaltenders wore inferior equipment, really. It was just nobody manufactured equipment the way they do these days. They wore a mask that was a softball catcher's mask, and they welded a little gate on here to protect their Adam's apple, but their ears were exposed, and boy, a lot of them took chunks off their ears all day with that ball coming at them. No helmet on there. Chest protector wasn't much. Our first goalie in Senior B was a guy named Ozzie Tott, no shin pads. He had a pair of football pants that came over his knees, and that was it. Oh, wow. And Bill Whitaker in St. Catharines played without a mask all those years in box lacrosse. So it was, when I played, the goalie had all the bruises. Nowadays, he's the one with no bruises because they have all that major padding that's on there. They set up. Some of them don't even look behind them when the ball passes them because it's gone by them. It's either missed or it's gone. But our goalies, Pat Baker, was all over the floor. He was a Port Dalhousie boy, settled in Peterborough, but they were good goaltenders. They were athletes. Yeah. Some of them weigh 300 pounds now, some of the bigger ones.
Bob, a great thing happened to lacrosse last year when a phenomenal player like yourself got nominated and inducted into the Ontario Hall of Fame. Can you tell us about that?
It was a real surprise, I'll tell you. I almost hung up on the guy. Well, as I started my little acceptance speech when I was inducted last October, I told them I almost hung up on them because we have a lot of crank calls, and I tell them they prey on the elderly too. So anyway, he introduced himself, and he just, I forget what he said, and of course I questioned him a couple of times, and it kind of got a little testy, and then he said that he wanted to tell me that I was going to be inducted into the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame. Well, I thought he said the Ontario Lacrosse Hall of Fame. And I said, I'm already in it. And he said, well, I know you're in the Canadian one, but I don't know about the Ontario one, but this has nothing to do with those. So, and it was a wonderful experience. Paul Coffey was part of it. We had a baseball player. We had a harness racer. I met Sandy Hawley that night, too. It was really a wonderful experience. And And things you don't really know about these players either. When Pat and I walked into the reception early, Paul Coffey was standing over the side, and I thought, well, I better go over and say hello and just introduce myself since we're both going to be inductees. And I got about from here to Mr. Boyer over there from him, and he goes behind his back. So that broke the ice. And anyway, it turned out he had played lacrosse. And he said, I hated going to Peterborough. I hated playing against those Evans kids. and so he knew all about it. At the end of the evening, Sandy Hawley was standing over at the side, and one of my daughters was talking to him. And so I went over to say hello. Same thing, I got partway there, and he goes behind his back. And so we started to chat, and he had tried to play lacrosse in Oshawa as a kid, and thought it was too rough, I guess, and so he decided to quit. And then he got a job at Winfield Farms. E.P. Taylor ran it. Of course, that's where Northern Dancer came from. But anyway, and then they turned him into a jockey. But he said something to me about how rough the lacrosse was. And I said, Sandy, I can't imagine sitting in one of those big beasts running that fast with a guy there and a guy there and a guy here and a guy there. I said, that's courage, you know. But so it was a really nice night to meet those people and talk to them, and they were all very accommodating. And Jack went in, you know, this week. Jack Bionda went in. I was talking to his daughter earlier this week, Jocelyn, and I think the inductions were Tuesday, really? Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
That's another aside if you're interested in crazy stories. Jack was having both knees done. This was quite a while ago, and Pat and I joined Jack and his wife, met them in Orillia. He came down from Huntsville, we went up from Peterborough. We joined him, and we had quite a dinner talking to him. And Jack and I had a real, there was a lot of sarcasm exchanged back and forth all the time between us, everything, and nothing was serious ever. And we were like a couple of kids. And anyway, we were sitting at the meal, and the meal was like that. And Pat and Joanne got up to go to the washroom, and all of a sudden Jack turned serious, and he says, you know, things are going really well for me right now. He said, just be my luck to die. And God, he could have knocked me over. I didn't know what the hell to say. And so I blurted out, can I have your stick? and he started to laugh. And we were still laughing when the girls got back. And it just went on. And then after the dinner was over, we hugged, and he went home and we went home, and 4 days later he was gone.
Wow.
But and then when we got to Orillia or to Huntsville for the funeral, actually we went up earlier, and Joanne said to me, can you answer me a question, Bob? And I said, well, what's that? She said, when they were wheeling Jack away to the operating room, the last thing he said was, tell Bobby he can't have my stick. And he took it right to the end. You know, yeah, it was quite a relationship we had.
I think what a great session, huh, with Bobby Allan and hearing the life and times here, you know. Yeah.
Hey, I forgot.
One more.
I forgot all about this. My dad was very superstitious, and he used to say things. He always thought it was good luck to look over your right shoulder at a new moon. So if you saw one, he'd always make sure, Bob, you look at that new moon over your shoulder. If you saw a penny on the street, he'd say, Bobby, pick it up, it's good luck. On the morning of the lacrosse game in England, the final, Don Barry and Josie and Pat and myself are on our way to breakfast, standing at the curb, and I looked down, and there were two shiny little English pennies there. I picked them up, I showed them to Don, and I said, there's the championship, right there. So there's the plaque they gave me, and there are the pennies. They've been there for 40 years, and that's not quite the end of it. In 2006, Canada still had only won once, and that was in 78. In 2006, I was in London. I was standing around near the Canadian dressing room, and the players were milling around waiting to go on the field and to play. And I looked down, and there's a shiny penny. I picked it up. I called Steve Toll over. He's from St. Catharines, too. Called Steve Toll over, and I told him my penny story, and I handed it to him. And he stuck it under the laces in his shoe, and guess who won that day? So I don't know whether Steve still has his penny or not.
Well, isn't that apropos that hockey always had a lucky loonie and lacrosse we got a lucky penny?
That's why all those guys quit.
That's right. One last fun fact from '78, which I didn't know till Timmy Barry wrote a story on it. You've all heard of Queen, the rock group, and that song, We Are the Champions, right? Well, apparently, I remember hearing them singing it as soon as we won that game on the walking
Not very
off the
well,
field.
but
they were trying.
It was
right?
good, yeah.
And apparently that was the first ever sporting event where that song was used in relationship to
Yeah.
it. So we're in the Guinness Book of World Records for using that song in a sporting event, apparently. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah.